The letter trembled in Sarah Thompson's gloved hands as she stood on the frozen platform of Wheatland, Wyoming, watching the last train disappear into the white wall of falling snow that had consumed the February afternoon of 1882. Her aunt was dead. The position as a schoolteacher that had brought her all the way from Massachusetts no longer existed. The boarding house where she had planned to stay had burned down 3 weeks prior, according to the station master, who now locked his door and hurried home before the storm worsened. 23 years old, alone, and stranded in a territory she had never seen before, Sarah felt the bitter wind cut through her wool traveling coat as if it were made of paper. She pulled her carpetbag closer and looked around the abandoned platform. Snow was already piling against the station walls, and the temperature seemed to drop with each passing minute. The few buildings she could make out through the swirling white were dark, their occupants sensibly tucked inside. She had no money for a hotel, even if she could find one in this weather, having spent nearly everything on the train ticket and the few necessities in her bag. Her fingers were going numb despite her gloves. Sarah stepped off the platform, her boots immediately sinking into snow that reached her ankles. She needed to find shelter, anything to get out of this wind. She remembered passing what looked like a church on the way into town, but in this blizzard, she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Each step was a struggle, and she wrapped her arms around herself, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. She had walked perhaps 20 yards when she heard it, the steady rhythm of hooves crunching through snow, and then a voice, deep and concerned, cutting through the howling wind. "Miss, you cannot be out in this." Sarah turned to see a large figure on horseback emerging from the white curtain. As he drew closer, she could make out a man in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with a dark beard covered in frost and serious brown eyes that studied her from beneath the brim of his snow-laden hat. He wore a heavy canvas coat and leather chaps, and his horse, a sturdy bay gelding, looked equally weathered by the storm. "I have nowhere to go," Sarah managed through chattering teeth. "The station is closed." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping hold of his reins. Up close, she could see the concern etched in his wind-burned face. "You will freeze to death out here. This is a genuine blizzard, the worst we have seen in 5 years. My cabin is 2 miles north. It is not much, but it is warm and dry." "I do not know you, sir," Sarah said, though even as she spoke, she felt her knees weakening from the cold. "My name is Reed Brennan. I work the cattle ranch just outside town. I only came in for supplies before the storm hit fully." He gestured to the pack behind his saddle. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but you have maybe 30 minutes before you lose feeling in your extremities. Look at your hands." Sarah looked down. Even through her gloves, her fingers were pale and she could barely flex them anymore. Fear, real and sharp, cut through her confusion. "I am Sarah Thompson. I came for a teaching position. I heard about Mrs. Henderson passing. I am sorry." Reed's voice was kind despite its urgency. "But we need to move now. Can you ride?" "Not well." "You will ride with me then. Come on." He grasped her arm gently but firmly and helped her up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arm came around her waist, steady and sure, and Sarah was too cold to protest. She felt the warmth of his body at her back as he urged the horse forward into the storm. The ride was both endless and strangely brief. Sarah lost track of time, focused only on staying conscious and upright. Reed's arm never wavered, and occasionally she heard him speaking to her, asking questions to keep her alert. She tried to answer, her words slurring together. The world had become nothing but white and cold in the steady movement of the horse beneath them. Then suddenly there were shapes in the snow. A fence, a barn, a small cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. Reed dismounted and pulled her down after him, practically carrying her to the door. The warmth that hit her face when he kicked it open was so intense it hurt. "Easy now," Reed said, guiding her to a chair near the cast-iron stove that dominated one corner of the single-room cabin. "Do not sit too close to the heat yet. Your fingers and toes, we need to check them." Sarah sat, dazed, as Reed moved with practiced efficiency. He stirred the fire, hung his coat and hat on pegs by the door, then knelt before her. "May I remove your boots?" She nodded, too exhausted to speak. He unlaced them carefully and eased them off, then her damp stockings. His hands were gentle as he examined her feet, then moved to her gloves. When those were off, he studied her fingers closely. "You were fortunate. No frostbite that I can see, but it was close. Very close." He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw anger flash across his features. "What were you thinking, coming out here without arrangements? This is not Boston or New York. Winter in Wyoming can kill you in an hour." "I had arrangements," Sarah said, finding her voice at last. It came out sharper than she intended, defensive. "My aunt was to meet me. I was to stay at the Miller boarding house. How was I to know she would die of influenza last week, or that the boarding house would burn? The letter informing me never reached me because I had already left." Reed's expression softened. He stood and moved to a small cabinet, pulling out thick wool socks. "Put these on. I will make coffee and heat some stew. You need to warm up from the inside." Sarah took the socks with shaking hands and pulled them on. They were far too large, but they were dry and wonderfully thick. She looked around the cabin properly for the first time. It was small but well maintained, everything in its place. A narrow bed against one wall, neatly made. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. Shelves holding supplies, dishes, and a few books. A trunk at the foot of the bed. Pegs by the door for coats and gear. No decoration except a faded photograph on one shelf of an older couple, stern-faced and formal. "Your parents?" she asked. Reed glanced at the photograph as he hung a pot of coffee over the fire. "Yes, they passed 3 years back. Influenza, like your aunt." "I am sorry. So am I." He opened a can and dumped its contents into a small pot, which he also hung over the fire. "I run cattle on their land now. Small operation, just me and a hired hand, but it is making enough to keep going. Where are you from originally?" "Springfield, Massachusetts." "I graduated from the normal school there and taught for 2 years before my aunt wrote about the position here. The pay was better and I wanted adventure, I suppose." She laughed bitterly. "I got more than I bargained for." "You did at that." Reed poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. "Drink slowly." The coffee was strong and hot, and Sarah wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. She sipped carefully, feeling the liquid heat travel down her throat and into her belly. Some of the terrible chill inside her began to ease. Reed sat in the other chair, cradling his own cup. "The storm should blow itself out in a day or 2, maybe 3. Until then, you stay here. No arguments. I will not have your death on my conscience, and that is exactly what will happen if you try to go anywhere in this weather. I have no money to pay you for your hospitality. I did not ask for any. This is simple human decency." He met her eyes, and Sarah saw nothing but sincerity there. "You will sleep in the bed, I will take the floor. I cannot put you out of your own bed. You can and you will. I have slept on the ground under the stars more times than I can count. My floor with a fire going is luxury by comparison." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. They ate the stew in comfortable silence. It was simple fare, beef and potatoes and carrots, but it was hot and filling, and Sarah felt strength returning to her limbs. After they finished, Reed washed the dishes while Sarah sat by the fire, slowly turning her hands and feet, making sure circulation returned properly. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing and snow battered against the single window. Sarah shuddered to think what would have happened if Reed had not found her. She would be dead now, frozen in some snowdrift. The thought made her dizzy. "You should sleep," Reed said, noticing her expression. "You have had a shock. Rest will help. It is barely evening. Time does not matter much in a blizzard. You sleep when you are tired, eat when you are hungry. The normal rules do not apply." He pulled blankets from the trunk and began making up a bed on the floor near the stove. Sarah stood on unsteady legs and moved to the bed. It was narrow but looked comfortable. She sat on the edge, suddenly aware of how improper this situation was. She was an unmarried woman, alone in a cabin with a man she had just met. If anyone knew, her reputation would be destroyed. But what choice did she have? It was this or death. "I know what you are thinking," Reed said quietly, not looking at her as he arranged his blankets. "About propriety and reputation. I give you my word as a gentleman that you are safe here. You have my respect and my protection, nothing more. When the storm clears, I will take you back to town and we will figure out what comes next. But while you are here, you are simply a person in need of help." His words, so plainly spoken, eased something tight in Sarah's chest. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Reed, we are a bit beyond formality now." "Then you must call me Sarah," he nodded, finally looking at her. In the firelight, his features were softer, less weathered. He had a kind face, she realized, beneath the beard and the serious expression. "Sleep well, Sarah. If you need anything in the night, wake me." Sarah removed her outer dress, down to her chemise and petticoat, and slipped under the quilts. They smelled of sage and wood smoke, clean and masculine. She lay on her side, facing the wall, listening to Reed moving around the cabin, banking the fire, checking the door. Then the room went dark except for the glow from the stove, and she heard him settle onto his makeshift bed. Sleep came faster than she expected, pulling her down into darkness. She woke once in the deep night to the sound of Reed adding wood to the fire. He moved quietly, trying not to disturb her, and she kept her eyes closed, listening. When he settled back onto the floor, she heard him sigh, a sound of weariness and something else. Loneliness, perhaps. She wondered how long he had been alone out here, how long since he had spoken to anyone beyond necessity. Morning came gray and still storm-wrapped. Sarah woke to find Reed already up, cooking something that smelled wonderful. She sat up, finger combing her hair, and he glanced over. "Morning. How do you feel?" "Much better, thank you. Warm." She stood and moved closer to the stove, drawn by the smell. "What are you making?" "Flapjacks. Nothing fancy but filling." He flipped one expertly in the pan. "Storm is still going. We are not going anywhere today." Sarah looked toward the window. Snow had drifted against it, nearly covering the glass. "I have never seen so much snow. Welcome to Wyoming." There was dry humor in his voice. "You get used to it." They ate breakfast together, and then the day stretched ahead of them, undefined and strange. Sarah offered to help with chores, and Reed set her to mending a tear in one of his shirts while he worked on repairing a bridle. They sat on opposite sides of the table, working in companionable silence. "Tell me about Massachusetts," Reed said after a while. "What is it like there?" Sarah threaded her needle carefully. "Green. Everything is green in summer, and there are trees everywhere, tall and old. The towns are close together, and you can hear church bells from every direction on Sunday morning. In winter it snows, but nothing like this. You can still move around, go to the shops, visit friends. Sounds crowded. It is compared to this, but I found it comforting, always having people nearby. Here the space feels enormous. It makes me feel very small." "I like the space," Reed said, working leather through a buckle. "It gives a man room to think, to breathe. In town, I always feel hemmed in." "I suppose we are very different then. Perhaps. Or perhaps you just have not given the space a chance yet. He looked up at her, his dark eyes thoughtful. It grows on you, the quiet. At first it seems empty. Then you start to notice things. The way the wind sounds different in different seasons. How the light changes throughout the day. The animals, the weather patterns. It is not empty at all. It is full, just in a different way than a city. Sarah considered this as she stitched. You love it here. I do. It is home. It is in my blood, I think. My father came out here in the 50s, before Wyoming was even a territory. He used to tell me stories about those early days, how hard it was, how beautiful. I never wanted to be anywhere else. Not even to see what else is out there. I went to Denver once. That was enough city for me. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. I lasted 3 days before I started feeling like I could not breathe right. Too many buildings, too many people, too much noise. Give me a campfire and stars any day. They talked through the day, sharing stories, learning each other. Reed spoke of his parents, the hard life they had built, the winters that had tested them, the droughts and the plenty years. Sarah told him about her own parents, both gone now, her father to consumption and her mother to a weak heart. She spoke of teaching, how much she loved watching children learn to read, the way their faces lit up when understanding dawned. You are a good teacher, I can tell, Reed said. You have patience and you listen. Thank you. I hope I will have the chance to teach again someday somewhere. Maybe you will. Wheatland keeps growing. There will be need for teachers. But Sarah heard the doubt in his voice. A single woman with no reputation, who had spent time alone in a cabin with a man. It would be talked about, no matter how innocent the circumstances. She felt a pang of grief for the future she had imagined, the one that had brought her west. That evening, Reed taught her to play poker using dried beans as chips. She proved to be a quick learner, and soon she was winning more hands than she lost, much to his amusement. You have a good poker face, he said, gathering the beans. I would not want to play you for real money. My father taught me cards. He said it was good for teaching strategy and reading people. He was right. Reed shuffled the worn deck. One more hand. They played until the light faded and Reed lit the oil lamp on the table. In its warm glow, the cabin felt cozy, a refuge against the storm that still raged outside. Sarah realized she felt more comfortable than she had in weeks, maybe months. There was something restful about Reed's presence, his quiet competence and kindness. The second day passed much like the first. The storm continued unabated. Reed went out once to check on his horse in the barn, coming back covered in snow, his beard frosted white. Sarah had coffee ready for him, and he wrapped his hands around the cup gratefully. Horse is fine. Good shelter out there, plenty of feed. He shook snow from his coat before hanging it. But this storm is something fierce. I have not seen its like in years. How long do you think it will last? Hard to say. Could blow out tonight, could go another day. We have enough supplies either way. Sarah nodded, trying not to think about what would happen when the storm did end, when she had to return to town and face the consequences of this improper situation. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the present moment. That afternoon, Reed pulled out a harmonica from his trunk and played for her. The music was plaintive and sweet, folk songs and ballads that spoke of longing and home. Sarah found herself moved nearly to tears by one particular melody, though she could not say why. That was beautiful, she said when he finished. Where did you learn to play? My mother taught me. She said music was what kept people human in hard times. He turned the harmonica over in his hands. This was hers, one of the few things of hers I kept. She was right, music does help. They prepared dinner together that evening, working side by side in the small space. Sarah peeled potatoes while Reed cut salt pork into cubes for frying. Their movements around each other became easier, more natural. When Sarah needed to reach for a pot, Reed was already handing it to her. When Reed looked for the salt, Sarah pointed to it without being asked. Over dinner, their conversation turned more personal. "Why did you never marry?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the boldness of the question. "I apologize. That was too forward." "No, it is all right." Reed pushed food around his plate. "I came close once. Girl in town, banker's daughter. But her father wanted her to marry someone more prosperous, someone with a future in business, not ranching. She agreed with him. That was 5 years ago. I have not found anyone since who made me want to try again. I am sorry, that must have hurt." "It did at the time. Now I think maybe we were not suited anyway. She wanted things I could not give her. A big house, fancy dresses, social standing. I just wanted someone to share this life with, to build something together." He met her eyes. "What about you?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "There was a man, another teacher. We courted for 6 months. He proposed and I accepted. Then a week before the wedding, I found out he had been courting another woman at the same time, the daughter of the school board chairman. He broke our engagement and married her instead. It gave him a promotion. He was a fool." The simple statement, said with such conviction, made Sarah's throat tight. "Thank you for saying that. It is the truth. Any man who would treat you so has no character worth speaking of." They cleaned up together, and then Reed brought out a book, a battered copy of Shakespeare's plays. "Do you read?" he asked. "I love to read." "Would you read aloud? I like hearing the words spoken, but I am not skilled at it." So Sarah read while Reed worked on carving a piece of wood by the fire, some small project he did not explain. She read Romeo and Juliet, the words flowing in the warm cabin, and Reed listened intently, occasionally smiling at a turn of phrase or a joke. When she reached the tragic ending, she found her voice wavering with emotion, and when she looked up, Reed's eyes were bright. "That is a powerful thing, love like that," he said quietly. "Consuming, but destructive. In this case, yes. But imagine if circumstances had been different, that kind of passion, that devotion, in a situation that could actually work. It would be extraordinary." Sarah closed the book slowly. "Do you believe in that kind of love? That intensity?" Reed was silent for a long moment, his knife stilled on the wood. "I did not used to. I thought it was just stories, exaggeration. But lately—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "I do not know any more." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them named. Then Reed stood abruptly. "It is late. You should sleep." Sarah nodded and moved to the bed, feeling strangely unsettled. As she lay in the darkness, listening to Reed settle on the floor, she thought about his words, about passion and devotion, about love that consumed and transformed. She thought about the way her heart had started beating faster when he looked at her across the table, the way his rare smiles made her feel warm inside. She was being foolish, she told herself. She had known this man for barely 2 days. These feelings were just gratitude for being rescued, nothing more. But even as she thought it, she knew it was not quite true. There was something about Reed Brennan that called to something deep inside her, something she had not known was there until now. The third morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah woke to brilliant sunshine streaming through the window, so intense after days of gray that she had to squint. Reed was already up, standing at the window, looking out. "Storm broke in the night," he said without turning. "We can head back to town today." Sarah sat up slowly, an unexpected weight settling in her chest. "Oh, good." Reed turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "I will need a few hours to dig out and check the trail. We will leave after midday." The morning passed too quickly. They ate breakfast in near silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah helped Reed gather and pack his supplies, moving through the familiar motions of the last few days with a sense of melancholy she could not shake. When Reed went out to saddle the horse and check the trail, Sarah stood in the middle of the cabin, looking around. Such a simple place, and yet it had become precious to her in just 3 days. It represented safety, warmth, kindness. It represented Reed. The thought of leaving, of returning to the uncertainties of town and her uncertain future, filled her with dread. Reed came back in, his expression serious. "Trail is clear enough. We should be able to make it to town in under 2 hours. He paused, watching her face. "Sarah, what is wrong?" "Nothing. I am fine." "You are not fine. You look like you are about to cry." Sarah turned away, blinking hard. "I am simply worried about what comes next. I have no position, no place to stay, very little money. And I will have spent 3 days alone with you, which means my reputation is likely ruined for teaching, even if a position did open up." She heard Reed move closer but did not turn. "Sarah, look at me." Slowly, she turned. He stood just a few feet away, his hat in his hands, his dark eyes intense on hers. "What if you did not go back to town?" he said. "I do not understand." Reed took a breath and she saw his hands tighten on his hat brim. "What if you stayed here, with me, as my wife?" Sarah stared at him, unable to process his words. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." He took another step closer. "I know we have only known each other 3 days. I know this is mad by any normal measure. But Sarah, I have felt more alive, more myself, more happy these past 3 days than I have in 5 years. When I think about you leaving, about never seeing you again, it feels wrong. It feels like losing something essential. Reed." She could barely whisper his name. "I am not a wealthy man. This cabin is small. The life is hard, especially in winter. I cannot offer you ease or luxury, but I can offer you a home, a partner, and—" He paused, his voice dropping. "And a love that would consume me if you gave me the chance to grow it. I think you feel it too, this pull between us. Tell me I am wrong, and I will take you back to town and never speak of this again. But if I am right, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then stay. Please stay." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She looked at this man, this good, kind, steady man who had saved her life and shown her nothing but respect and gentleness. She thought about the way she felt when he looked at her, the way their conversations flowed, the way the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. She thought about how the cabin had begun to feel like home in just 3 days, more than anywhere else ever had. "I barely know you," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "Then stay and get to know me. Court me properly if you want. I will ride into town and tell everyone you are staying with the widow Miller who lives 5 miles east. We will do everything right. But give us a chance, Sarah. Give this a chance. This is insane." "I know." He smiled then, that rare transforming smile. "But sometimes the best things are." Sarah closed the distance between them and took his hands. They were rough from work, calloused and strong, and they held hers with such gentleness. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have tried to tell myself it is just gratitude or loneliness or fear of my circumstances. But it is none of those things. When I think about leaving, I feel like I am about to make the worst mistake of my life." Reed's expression blazed with hope and joy. "Is that a yes?" "It is a yes to courting you properly. To staying and seeing if this feeling, this pull as you called it, is real and lasting. I will not marry you today, Reed Brennan. But ask me again in a few months and my answer might be different. I can live with that." He raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so courtly and sweet that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I will court you properly, Sarah Thompson. I will do everything right." "We need to figure out the practical matters," Sarah said, though she did not pull her hands away. If I stay here, people will talk. You will not stay here. I told you Widow Miller lives 5 miles east. Her husband died last year and she has been taking in boarders. She is respectable and well-liked. You will stay with her and I will visit you properly with her as chaperone. When enough time has passed, when we are certain this is what we both want, then we will marry and you can come home. You have thought this through. I have thought of little else since yesterday. He smiled sheepishly. I had hoped I might find the courage to say something before we left. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. You are a surprising man, Reed Brennan. I hope that is a good thing. It is a very good thing. They rode to Mrs. Miller's farm together, Sarah once again sitting in front of Reed on his horse, though this time for very different reasons. She leaned back against his chest and felt his arms secure around her waist, and everything felt right in a way she could not explain but did not need to. Some things simply were. Mrs. Miller was a practical woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a kind smile. She listened to their story, including the storm and the 3 days in the cabin, without interrupting. So you want to court this girl proper, make sure her reputation stays intact, she said when they finished. Yes, madam, Reed said. I can pay for her room and board. I do not doubt it. Mrs. Miller looked at Sarah appraisingly. You are certain about this girl, you only just met this man. I know it seems hasty, Sarah said, but I have never been more certain of anything. Mrs. Miller nodded slowly. Sometimes you just know. I knew I would marry my Henry the day I met him. We were married 3 weeks later and had 40 happy years together before he passed. She stood. All right then. You can stay here, Miss Thompson. Reed Brennan, you can visit on Sundays and Wednesday afternoons, properly supervised. We will see how this goes. Relief flooded through Sarah. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I will earn my keep. I can help with the house, the cooking, whatever you need. I am sure we will figure something out. Now then, Reed, you best be going. It will be dark soon and you have a ride ahead of you. Reed nodded. At the door, he turned to Sarah. I will see you on Sunday. I will be here. He held her gaze for a long moment, and Sarah saw everything she felt reflected in his eyes. Promise. Hope. The beginning of something extraordinary. Then he was gone, riding into the sunset, and Sarah watched until he disappeared from sight. The next months unfolded like a dream. True to his word, Reed visited every Sunday and Wednesday, always properly chaperoned by Mrs. Miller, who would sit in the corner with her knitting and pretend not to listen to their conversations. He brought Sarah small gifts, wildflowers in spring, a book of poetry, a shawl his mother had made years ago that he wanted her to have. They talked endlessly, learning each other's minds and hearts. Reed told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the herd, maybe bring in some new breeding stock. Sarah shared her love of teaching, and together they began planning to start a small school on the Miller property for the scattered children of neighboring ranches. On warm days, they walked the property with Mrs. Miller trailing behind at a discreet distance. Reed pointed out different plants and birds, teaching Sarah to read the land the way he did. She found herself falling in love not just with him, but with this vast open country that had seemed so alien at first. She began to understand what he meant about space and silence being full rather than empty. He kissed her for the first time in late April, with the spring grass turning the hills green and wildflowers blooming in riotous colors. They had walked to a ridge overlooking the valley, and the view stretched for miles in every direction. Mrs. Miller had stopped a respectful distance back to examine some plant or other, giving them a moment of privacy. I love you, Sarah, Reed said, taking her hands. I think I have loved you since that first night, watching you drink coffee by my fire and being brave even though you were terrified. I love your mind, your kindness, your humor, the way you see beauty in everything. I love how you read aloud and how you laugh at my bad jokes and how you are not afraid to challenge me when you think I am wrong. I love everything about you." Sarah looked up at this man who had become the center of her world, this good man with his quiet strength and gentle heart. "I love you too. I love your steadiness and your passion for this land. I love how patient you are, how kind. I love that you listen, really listen, and that you see me as a whole person, not just what I can do for you. I love your rare smiles and the way you play the harmonica and how safe I feel with you. I love everything about you too." He cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her, soft and sweet, and Sarah felt the world tilt and resettle into new patterns. When they parted, both were smiling, and Mrs. Miller was loudly clearing her throat from where she stood. "I think you should probably ask me that question now," Sarah said softly. Reed laughed, a sound of pure joy. He went down on one knee right there on the ridge with the valley spread below them and the sky vast overhead. "Sarah Thompson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and partner, share this life with me, let me love you for as long as I live? Yes, yes to all of it." He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her again with more passion this time. And Sarah kissed him back with all the love she felt, this overwhelming, consuming love that had grown from a snowstorm and 3 days in a cabin. They were married in June in the small church in Wheatland, with Mrs. Miller and Reed's ranch hand, a grizzled veteran named Tom, as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple dress of blue cotton, and Reed wore his best suit, the one he had worn to his parents' funerals and thought he might never need again. The Reverend pronounced them man and wife, and when Reed kissed his bride, there were tears in both their eyes. They held a modest reception at Mrs. Miller's farm, with neighbors and townsfolk who had come to know and respect Sarah over the past months. There was food and music, and Reed played his harmonica while others danced. As the sun set, he took Sarah's hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Brennan?" The name sent a thrill through her. "More than ready." They rode to the cabin together in the twilight, and when Reed carried her over the threshold, Sarah laughed with sheer happiness. It was the same cabin she had first seen in the middle of a blizzard, but now it was transformed. Reed had spent weeks fixing it up, expanding it slightly, building a proper kitchen area and even adding a small bedroom separated from the main room by a curtain. There were new quilts on the bed, curtains at the window, a rug on the floor. It was simple, but it was theirs, and it was home. That night, in the darkness of their marriage bed, Reed held Sarah close and whispered against her hair. "I was dying before you came. I did not know it, but I was. Just going through the motions day after day with no real purpose. You brought me back to life. You are everything I did not know I needed." Sarah turned in his arms to face him, running her fingers along his bearded jaw. "That snowstorm was the best thing that ever happened to me. Finding you was the best thing. I thought I was coming west for a teaching position, but I was really coming home to you. I know that now." They made love for the first time as husband and wife, tender and passionate, learning each other's bodies with the same care and attention they had learned each other's hearts. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they talked long into the night about their hopes and dreams and plans for the future they would build together. Sarah adapted to ranch life more easily than either of them expected. She learned to cook on the cast iron stove, to preserve vegetables and fruit for winter, to churn butter and bake bread. Reed taught her to ride properly, and soon she was confident enough to accompany him around the property. She helped with the cattle when needed, though Reed tried to keep her from the heaviest work. In the fall, they started the school Sarah had dreamed of, using a corner of the cabin at first, then building a small separate structure the following spring. Children came from scattered ranches within a 10-mile radius, and Sarah taught them reading and arithmetic and history with all the passion she had brought to her teaching in Massachusetts. Reed would sometimes stop by to listen, leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed and a proud smile on his face. Their first winter together was hard but joyful. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but Sarah found she did not mind. The isolation she had once feared became precious. They read aloud to each other, played cards and chess, made love and talked and simply existed together in peaceful contentment. When the spring thaw came, Sarah realized she had not once thought longingly of Massachusetts or her old life. This was her life now, and she would not trade it for anything. In their second year of marriage, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Reed on a warm summer evening as they sat on the porch he had built, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I am going to have a baby," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Reed went very still, his eyes wide. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. Mrs. Miller thinks early February." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. "Sorry, sorry." He loosened his grip but did not let go. "Sarah, this is, I do not have words, a baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, amazed, grateful, excited, all of those things at once. He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You are going to be such a wonderful mother, and you will be a wonderful father." They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and how they would need to expand the cabin again, about how their child would grow up with this vast, beautiful country as their playground. Reed was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting Sarah reduce her work, rest more, eat more. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, knowing it came from love. As her pregnancy progressed through fall and into winter, Sarah felt herself changing. Her body grew round and awkward, but she felt powerful too, creating new life. Reed was endlessly fascinated by her changing shape, by the baby's movements that started in the 5th month. He would lay his head on her belly and talk to the child, telling stories about the ranch and the land, promising to teach them to ride and rope, and all the skills of the West. Sarah went into labor on a cold February night during a light snowfall, as if their child wanted to honor the circumstances of their parents' meeting. Mrs. Miller came to help, along with a midwife from town. Reed paced outside for hours, unable to stay still until finally, as dawn broke, he heard the thin wail of a newborn. Mrs. Miller emerged, beaming. "You have a son, a big healthy boy, and your wife is fine. She wants you." Reed rushed inside to find Sarah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love it took his breath away. "Meet your son," she said softly. Reed sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peering from the blankets. His son. His and Sarah's son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small snuffling noises, his tiny fists waving. "He is perfect," Reed whispered. "You are amazing." What should we name him? They had discussed names for months, unable to decide. But now, looking at their son, Sarah said, "I think Robert John, after both our fathers. Robert John Brennan." Reed tried it out, then smiled. "It is perfect." They spent the next weeks in a haze of exhaustion and overwhelming love. Robert was a good baby, healthy and growing fast, and Reed proved to be a devoted father. He would wake in the night to help with feedings, walking the floor with his son when Robert was fussy, singing quiet songs. Sarah would watch them from the bed, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. As Robert grew from infant to toddler, the cabin rang with his laughter and babbling. He took his first steps on a warm spring day, stumbling from his mother's arms to his father's, both parents cheering wildly. He said his first word, Dada, much to Reed's delight and Sarah's mock indignation. Life settled into a rhythm that felt timeless and right. The ranch prospered under Reed's management, and he was able to hire another hand, which eased his workload. Sarah continued teaching, with Robert playing nearby during lessons. The community they were part of grew and deepened, neighbors helping neighbors through hard times and celebrating together in good times. When Robert was 3, Sarah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, the sickness lasting longer, and she was more tired. Reed worried constantly, but Sarah reassured him. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am fine. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Grace, was born on a beautiful October day when the leaves on the cottonwoods along the creek had turned gold. She had Sarah's gray eyes and proved to have her mother's determination from the start, demanding to be fed exactly when she wanted and not a moment later. With 2 children, the cabin was bursting at the seams, so Reed and Tom spent the next summer building an addition. By the time it was finished, they had a proper 2-bedroom house, still small by some standards but spacious for them. There was a parlor with Sarah's books and Reed's harmonica and a rocking chair where Sarah nursed Emma while Robert played at her feet. The years passed, each one marked by small joys and occasional sorrows. There were hard winters when they lost cattle, and one terrible year when drought threatened the ranch's survival. But they weathered every storm together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. Sarah's school grew, and eventually, the community built a proper schoolhouse in town, with Sarah as the head teacher. She rode in 3 days a week, leaving the children with Reed on those days, an arrangement that worked well for everyone. Robert grew into a thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the animals as much as his father did. Emma proved to be passionate about learning, always asking questions, always wanting to know more. When Robert was 7 and Emma 4, Sarah had a third child, another son they named William James. He was a happy, easy-going baby who seemed content to watch his older siblings with solemn eyes. One evening when William was about 6 months old, Sarah stood on the porch watching Reed teach Robert to rope a fence post while Emma ran in circles around them, pretending to be a wild horse. The sun was setting, painting everything golden, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Reed caught her eye and smiled, that transforming smile she still loved after all these years. He said something to Robert, then walked over to her, taking William from her arms and cradling the baby against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That snowstorm. 8 years ago. What if you had not come along? What if I had tried to wait it out at the station or gone to the wrong place? What if you had not stopped to help? But I did, and you lived, and here we are, she echoed, leaning against his side. I was so scared that day, I thought I had made a terrible mistake coming west. But it led me to you, to this life, to our children. It led me home. You ever miss Massachusetts, your old life?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss certain things, the ocean, which I have not seen in years, old friends, but miss that life. No, never. This is where I belong. With you, with our family in this place. I would not change a single thing, even the hard parts, because they are all part of our story." Reed kissed the top of her head, careful not to jostle the baby. "I love you, Sarah Brennan. More today than yesterday, more tomorrow than today. Quoting poetry at me, Cowboy. I learned from the best." They stood together, watching their children play in the fading light, and Sarah thought about journeys and destinations, about how sometimes what looks like the end of the road is really just a new beginning. She had come west for a teaching position that no longer existed, fleeing grief and heartbreak, and had found instead a love that consumed and fulfilled her, a home in a wilderness she had never imagined, and a life richer than any she could have dreamed. The years continued to unfold. Robert grew tall and strong, taking over more responsibilities on the ranch, working side by side with his father. Emma proved to be a gifted student, devouring every book she could get her hands on, and Sarah dreamed of sending her to college someday. William was the peacemaker of the family, gentle and kind, with a talent for music that reminded Sarah of Reed's mother. When Sarah was 35 and Reed 37, they had one more child, a surprise daughter they named Grace Helen, after both their mothers. She was the baby of the family, doted on by her older siblings, and she grew up confident and fearless, riding before she could properly walk and climbing everything in sight. The ranch prospered. Reed's reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle spread, and he was able to expand his holdings, buying the adjacent property when the owner retired. The little cabin that had sheltered Sarah during that long-ago blizzard was still there, now used for storage, but Reed would never tear it down. It was where their story began, he said, and it would stand as long as he had breath in his body. Sarah's school became one of the best in the territory, then the state when Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890. She received offers to move to bigger schools, to become a superintendent, but she always declined. Her place was here, in Wheatland, teaching the children of her community, living the life she and Reed had built together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Reed took Sarah back to that ridge where he had first told her he loved her and proposed. The children were all old enough to be left with Mrs. Miller for an evening, though she was getting on in years now, her hair white and her step slower, but still sharp as a tack. They stood looking out over the valley, the same view but changed by 20 years. More fences now, more buildings, signs of settlement and civilization spreading across the wild land. "You remember standing here all those years ago?" Reed asked, his arm around Sarah's waist. "Every detail. You went down on one knee right there, and I said yes, and Mrs. Miller cleared her throat very loudly. Reed laughed. "She has never been subtle. Sarah, these 20 years with you have been the best of my life. You have given me everything. A home, a family, purpose, joy, love beyond measure. I would live through that blizzard 1,000 times if it meant ending up with you." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. They were older now, lines on their faces, gray streaking through hair that had once been uniformly dark or auburn. Reed's beard was more gray than black. Sarah's hands were roughened by work, her face weathered by sun and wind. But when they looked at each other, they saw past the surface to the souls beneath, souls that were entwined so thoroughly they could not imagine being separate. "You saved my life that day," Sarah said. "Not just from freezing, though that too. You saved me from a half-life I did not even know I was living. You showed me what real love looks like, what partnership means. You gave me space to be fully myself while also being fully yours. These 20 years have been everything I never knew I wanted." They kissed as the sun set, husband and wife, partners and lovers and best friends. Two people who had found each other in a snowstorm and built a life that was more than either could have imagined. The years ahead brought more changes. Robert married a rancher's daughter and brought her to live on the property, building a house just over the rise from his parents. Emma did go to college, the first in their family, studying literature and history, and came back to teach alongside her mother. William surprised everyone by moving to Cheyenne to study law, though he came home often. Grace grew up to be as wild and free as her name suggested, a skilled rider who helped run the ranch and had no interest in the traditional path of marriage and children, at least not yet. Reed and Sarah grew old together, their love maturing like fine wine, gaining depth and complexity. They saw Wyoming transform from wild territory to established state, saw the frontier days fade into memory. They welcomed grandchildren, delighting in Robert's 2 boys and Emma's daughter. They survived the harsh winter of 1897, the drought of 1901, the economic panics that shook the nation but barely touched their self-sufficient life. On a warm summer evening in 1906, when Sarah was 56 and Reed 58, they sat on the porch of their house, now expanded and weathered, a proper ranch house surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Their grandchildren played in the yard, supervised by Robert and his wife. Emma was inside helping with dinner. William had just arrived from Cheyenne with his new bride. Grace was out checking on the cattle with Tom's son, who had taken over when old Tom finally retired. "We did good, did we not?" Reed said, taking Sarah's hand. His fingers were stiff now with arthritis, but his grip was still strong. "We did better than good. We built something real, something that will last beyond us. Robert will keep the ranch going. He has good sense, that boy. He learned from the best." Sarah squeezed his hand. "And Emma is making a real difference in education. They are talking about making her the district superintendent. She will be good at it, gets her intelligence from her mother, and her stubbornness from her father." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower. This was Sarah's favorite time of day, had been for 24 years of marriage. The peace, the golden light, the sense of a day well spent and home safe around them. "Sarah," Reed said quietly, "if you had it to do over, knowing everything that would happen, the hard times and the good, would you still say yes? That day on the ridge, would you still marry me?" Sarah looked at him. This man who had been her partner through more than 2 decades of life, who had loved her through joy and sorrow, who had built this extraordinary life with her from nothing but determination and love. "I would say yes 1,000 times over." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Reed Brennan. The best choice I ever made was staying in that cabin when you said stay. The second best was saying yes when you asked me to marry you. I love you today as much as I did then. More even, because now I know exactly what I have." "What we have?" Reed brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles just as he had that day in the cabin so many years ago. "I love you beyond words, Sarah. Always have, always will. When I found you in that blizzard, I found my purpose, my home, my everything." As the sun set and the family gathered for dinner, calling them inside, Reed and Sarah stood together, arms around each other, taking one last look at the land they had built their life on. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and the air smelled of sage and pine and home. "Come on, old man," Sarah said, smiling up at her husband. "Our family is waiting." "Our family," Reed echoed, wonder still in his voice after all these years. "I like the sound of that." They walked inside together, into the warmth and noise and love, and behind them the door closed on another perfect day in a life full of them. The snowstorm that had brought them together was long past, but its gift remained. A love story written across the Wyoming landscape, a testament to how the worst day of your life can turn into the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to you. In the years that followed, Reed and Sarah remained the heart of their growing family. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, welcomed new grandchildren, and mourned when Mrs. Miller finally passed at the age of 83. They donated money to build a new church in Wheatland and established a small library in town, filling it with books Sarah had collected over the years. When Sarah was 60, the state asked her to travel to the capital to speak about education reform. She was gone for a week, the longest she and Reed had been apart since their marriage. When she returned, Reed met her at the station in town, and they embraced like young lovers reunited after years instead of days. "Never again," Reed said against her hair. "A week is too long." "I agree completely." They grew older but remained active, still riding the property together when Reed's joints allowed, still hosting Sunday dinners for the whole sprawling family. Their house was always full of people, laughter, and love. They were the anchor, the foundation upon which everything else was built, and they knew it and embraced it. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. There were dozens of people now, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, neighbors and friends. Someone had baked an enormous cake. There were speeches and toasts and music. Robert stood and talked about his parents' example of what marriage should be. Emma read a poem she had written about love that endures. William gave a lawyer's speech about partnership and commitment that was surprisingly touching. Grace simply said, "You two are the best people I know, and I love you." Reed and Sarah stood together at the center of it all, overwhelmed and grateful. When Reed was asked to say something, he pulled Sarah close and said simply, "I found her in a blizzard and she changed everything. Best day of my life." Sarah added, "He told me to stay and I never wanted to leave, still do not, never will." As the party continued around them, they slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the darkness. They stood looking up, hands clasped, and Sarah thought about the grand sweep of their lives together, all that had happened since that cold February day in 1882. 30 years, she said softly. Where did the time go? Into memories, into children and grandchildren, into every day we spent together. I would not change a moment of it. Even the hard times, especially the hard times, they showed us what we were made of, what we could overcome together. They stood in silence for a while, then Reed said, "Sarah, I am an old man now. My body is not what it was. There may not be 30 more years ahead. Do not talk like that. I am being realistic. But I want you to know, whatever time we have left, be it 30 years or 30 days, I will spend every moment grateful for you. You are my greatest blessing. You are everything." Sarah felt tears slide down her cheeks. "You are my everything too. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me love when I thought I would never risk it again. You gave me this beautiful life, this family, this place. You are woven into every part of who I am." They held each other under the stars, and inside the house, their family celebrated the love that had created them all, the enduring love between a cowboy and a teacher who had found each other in a snowstorm and built something extraordinary from that chance encounter. Reed and Sarah had 12 more years together after that anniversary. They were good years, full years, though Reed's health slowly declined. His joints grew stiffer, his step slower, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Sarah never dimmed. They spent their days in each other's company, telling and retelling the stories of their life together, enjoying their family, watching Wyoming continue to change and grow. When Reed was 70, he took ill with pneumonia. Sarah nursed him through it, barely leaving his side, and he recovered, though he was weaker after. The doctor warned them he might not survive another illness, that his lungs were permanently damaged. They made the most of the time they had. Reed taught his grandsons everything he knew about ranching, passing down his knowledge and wisdom. Sarah worked on writing down the history of the family, creating a record for future generations. They sat together every evening on the porch, watching the sun set, saying little because words were no longer necessary. One warm September evening in 1918, when Sarah was 68 and Reed 70, they sat together as usual, Reed had been quiet all day, more tired than normal. As the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, he took Sarah's hand. "It has been a good life," he said quietly. "The best life. It has, the best. I am tired, Sarah, so tired." She felt fear clutch at her heart, but she kept her voice steady. "Then rest, my love, I am here." Reed leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes, still holding her hand. "I love you, always and forever." "I love you too, always and forever." He took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and was still. Sarah sat beside him, holding his hand as the sun set and the stars came out, and she said goodbye to the love of her life, the man who had saved her in a blizzard and given her 36 years of happiness she had never imagined possible. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county. Reed had been respected and loved, a pillar of the community, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. Sarah stood dry-eyed through it all, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace, though inside she felt like a part of her had been torn away. In the weeks after, she moved through life mechanically. Robert and Emma tried to convince her to move in with one of them, but she refused. The ranch house was her home, filled with Reed's presence, and she would not leave it. Slowly, she found her way forward. She threw herself into her writing project, determined to preserve every story, every memory of their life together. She spent time with her family, taking comfort in the generations she and Reed had created together. She continued teaching part-time, finding purpose in the work she had always loved. At night, she slept on Reed's side of the bed, where she could still catch the faint scent of him in the pillow. She talked to him sometimes, telling him about her day, about the children and grandchildren, about what was happening in the world. It comforted her to think he could hear, somewhere. 3 years passed. Sarah turned 71. Her health remained good, and she continued to be active in the community. Then one cold February morning, she woke to find snow falling heavily, the first real blizzard they had had in years. She stood at the window, watching the white world outside, and thought about another blizzard 39 years ago. That evening, after the storm had passed, Sarah sat at the table with the manuscript she had been working on, the history of her and Reed's life together. It was finished now, complete from that first day to Reed's passing. She read through the final pages, satisfied that she had captured it all, the joy and sorrow, the triumphs and trials, the enduring love that had sustained them through everything. She set the manuscript aside, stood, and moved to the window. The world outside was white and pure, transformed by snow, and she thought about transformations, about how a blizzard had transformed her life, bringing her to Reed, to Wyoming, to this extraordinary journey she had been privileged to live. "I am ready," she said quietly to the empty room, to Reed, who she felt was somehow near. "I have done what I needed to do. The story is complete. I am ready to come home to you." She went to bed that night peacefully, without fear. In the morning, Emma came to check on her and found her mother had passed in her sleep, a peaceful expression on her face, her hands folded over her heart. They buried Sarah next to Reed on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under the vast Wyoming sky they had both loved. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, and a single line that Emma had chosen from Sarah's manuscript. "A blizzard brought us together. Love kept us forever." The ranch continued under Robert's stewardship, then passed to his sons. The house remained in the family, filled with new generations. The schoolhouse in town was eventually renamed the Sarah Brennan School in honor of her contributions to education. The little library they had founded grew into a larger institution, with a special collection of books Sarah had loved. But more than buildings or institutions, Their legacy lived on in the descendants who spread across Wyoming and beyond, carrying forward the values Reed and Sarah had lived by: kindness, hard work, devotion to family, and the kind of love that transforms and endures. The story of how they met, the cowboy and the teacher trapped in a blizzard, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. A reminder that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes, that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that saying yes to taking a chance can change everything. And on winter nights when the wind howls and snow falls heavy, some say you can still feel their presence in the old ranch house, a warmth that has nothing to do with the fire in the stove, a sense of love so strong it lingers beyond death, a testament to a cowboy who said stay and a teacher who never wanted to leave. Two souls who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. The story was complete, the circle closed, but the love story between Reed Brennan and Sarah Thompson lived on, woven into the fabric of the land itself, eternal as the Wyoming sky, enduring as the mountains, infinite as the love that had brought them together and kept them forever.